So, last time we were talking about the monastic community and some of the precepts and how you live and so on. And then at the end of the session during the Q&A, that question came up about therapy and psychology. And so after we talked a little bit about it, and then afterwards I was talking to Venerable Losang, and he had some ideas to share, so which he wrote out. So we'll begin the session with that and some more ideas I have about therapy and Buddhism, and then return to talking about monastic life. Okay. So do the visualization. Prepare your mind so that you want to take refuge, you want to generate bodhicitta. So right now we have a precious human life with all the conditions to meet the Dharma and to practice it. So it's important to be aware of the preciousness of our life, its possibilities, and then to use those possibilities. And this, of course, entails being aware of what's going on in our mind all day long, because when we aren't aware, then we easily go down the slippery slope of all of our habitual tendencies to look at situations in certain ways, to have certain emotions. And when we do that, we're just kind of lost in our comfortable neurosis, which is actually quite uncomfortable. So let's make some determination to be aware, to monitor our mind and what's going on in it, so that we can direct it towards virtuous thoughts. If we aren't clear about what is virtuous and what is not, then we should really focus on the chapter about about karma in the Lamrim, and become very familiar with that. And also focus on texts that from the thought training teachings that discuss karma, like the Wheel of Sharp Weapons. And in that way, we can come back to our aspirations to develop renunciation, compassion, and the right view, and make our lives meaningful. So cultivate that motivation now, as we're about to share the Dharma this afternoon. Okay, so here, sorry, here's what Venerable Losang said about, it seems to me that sometimes modern Western psychology gets brought into Buddhism, and I don't think this is always helpful. How we mentally frame our experiences, both our recent ones and those further in our past, can give those experiences a greater or lesser hold on our present mind. Sometimes looking into our past from a psychological perspective can help us sort out things a bit. But there is often the tendency to hold past events as part of one's identity. Yeah. And that I brought up at the beginning about the young adult week where everybody had trauma. I think that's a very good example of this. You know, like, well, everybody had, they told me, I said, who has trauma? Everybody has trauma. You know, so you know your trauma, and then this is your identity, who you are, how you're wounded, how you're broken, and how you need special care. You need a safe place at your university. You need to be able to call out microaggressions, like when somebody doesn't say please and thank you. You know, and everything becomes just blown up out of proportion in my view. Yeah, that leads to a lot of confusion and more suffering. When I encountered Buddhism, you know, aside from thinking that my teachers were going to kind of give me the praise and love that I wish my parents had given me, you know, and being disappointed when they didn't quite teach, you know, treat me that same way, you know, and recognizing, oh, this is my mind. What astonished me is they had absolutely no interest in my story. You know how we all have our story. In childhood, this happened, and my family was like this, and this horrible thing happened to me, and the kids on the playground made fun of me, and I was, you know, insulted. And whenever they picked sports teams, I was the last one to be picked. And, you know, and you want to tell your story because this is who you are. And this is how people often become close, is by sharing their story. So I was very shocked that my teachers had absolutely no interest in my story. I thought it was important because, you know, if they were going to lead me to enlightenment, they should have all the background, you know? Yeah. And just knowing that I have 84,000 afflictions like everybody else was not sufficient. You know, they should know the details of, you know, my suffering. You know? And they had no interest. Can you imagine that? Somebody who is not interested in your story. Your story, your prize story, you know? So this really made me think, yeah, why am I holding this story so tightly? Yeah. And why am I presenting myself to others as the culmination of this story? And why in my story do I have more points about suffering than all the kindness that was given to me? Yeah. Why are the things I didn't like in bold italic font 24 and the kindness I had received in regular print font 8? You know? So, yeah. So here's more from Venerable Losang. I find Buddhism offers a more healthy perspective than this one of identity for our story. When we look at painful memories with an understanding of impermanence and realize that we are not the same person we were then, it can be helpful. Also, changing how we view those who harmed us through recognizing that those people were suffering and overwhelmed by afflictions and wrong views can help free us from anger towards them. These are only a few examples of familiar Dharma tools we can help that can be helpful to work with my mind through a Dharma perspective. These two are not always compatible, although in some situations they can be Dharma tools and psychological tools. These two systems view the person in very different ways. Yeah. Also, in psychology, there is often an unacknowledged assumption that the mind is an emergent property of the brain. Yeah, so you got to change the brain. Yeah. I have found Dharma teachers to be good role models. I wouldn't say that about the therapists I have gone to, although some were definitely nice people. Something helpful a therapist once said to me was, "I think you are seeking spirituality." And that made him start saying, "Oh, yes," and start to explore. Okay. So I think he brings up very many good points here, about our story, creating an identity, of who we think we are, how other people should treat us, and so on. And he also brought up the ethical standards um, in therapy and in Buddhism cannot be sometimes are the same and sometimes are not. Yeah. Um, I was at one event where a therapist was speaking, and he was encouraging people to be angry for abuse that they had experienced as children. Yeah. Whereas if you talk to a spiritual mentor, they're not going to encourage that at all. Yeah. They're going to say, you have to look at that person in a different way and to be able to release your anger. Okay, so there's those things. And then also what he brought up about his Dharma teachers are role models, kind of showing him what he wants to become, whereas, therapists are not necessarily that, and they don't intend to be, That's not part of your job as a therapist, to be a good role model. So these are things just to keep in mind. And when the question came up, do you need Dharma? Do you need therapy? It really depends on the situation. Some things, really the Dharma is perfect for. And some people, the Dharma works really well for those things. Other people, they really want to go through their story and all the family relationships and so on, and they find therapy very helpful. That's fine, whatever helps. Yeah. Therapy can help sometimes with people when people have a lot of afflictions, kind of preventing them from practicing Dharma. Then if you can go and resolve some of those in therapy, then when you come to Dharma, your mind is more expansive and you can take in some of the things that are being taught. Yeah. Okay, anything else on this topic? Okay. I should say that the Vipassana community, it's interesting to see how they've been evolving over the years, because at first, they were just teaching that meditation technique. And then the question came up for them, what about therapy? And then it was like everybody went to therapy. Yeah. And then it was another swing to some other teacher, So very interesting to see how that happens, yeah. Yeah, the Tibetan tradition hasn't swung in that way, but we've had our own set of things to deal with. Okay, now to get back to what I was talking about, ordained life. So one thing before ordaining that is really important is you don't just say, I want to ordain, and then find the monastery where you like the food the best, um, you know, or the monastery in the nicest place. Yeah, it's important. It's not just any old monastery, because there's different Buddhist traditions, different practices in these traditions. And then, it's important to have a teacher that you rely on. So I think rather than going monastery shopping, in your practice, what's important first is to set up a daily practice with what you've learned. And then through that, figure out who, uh, if you have some tendency for monastic life, and even if you don't, who is going to guide you on the path? Yeah, because as it came up before, in America, I mean, it's not just 31 flavors of Buddhism. It's like, yeah, so many different centers. And even in one tradition, you know, each monastery in that tradition has their own center. Each teacher in that tradition has their own center. Yeah. And then, where do you go and what do you do? Yeah. So it's important to kind of have an idea about that, especially, you know, because if you join a monastery, but you don't feel any connection with the teacher teaching you there, that's not going to work. There has to be some connection where you have some faith and trust in that person so that when they try and give you instructions, you're willing to listen and to practice them. Yeah. Similarly, you want to figure out what kind of meditation techniques help you, what kind of philosophical approach you want to have. There's some Buddhist traditions that you come along and the first thing you go to, you're taking tantric empowerments. Yeah. And then there's other traditions where, Tantra is seen in its place as a very advanced teaching, and you're encouraged to really develop a good, solid understanding of the Buddhist worldview and the necessary topics to be familiar with before entering Tantra. Okay? There's some centers, I mean, when you consider all the different Buddhist traditions, that will, you know, keep very good ethical conduct, and other centers that are a lot looser. Somebody told me about a center they went to in London, and after the teachings, they all went out to the pub. Somebody else told me about attending a teacher, teachings by one teacher who he really liked, and he kept going back there even after they found the teacher passed out on the sidewalk one day because he drank too much. Yeah. So you have to check things out. Yeah. And, who is going to be a good example for you? I knew for myself I needed a teacher who kept very good ethical conduct. Yeah. I didn't need a teacher who was like, every tiny thing, has to be done absolutely perfect, because, I grew up in a tradition where I grew up in a Jewish family where the rabbis, all debated each other. Yeah, so Tibetans debating, that's like normal. They all, have different ideas and they debate. Yeah, I heard about that in Judaism. But then, the way some of the things are kept, that, you don't mix meat and milk. The idea being that you don't cook a lamb in its mother's milk. That's not kind. It's okay to kill the lamb and eat it, but you can't cook it in the mother's milk. Okay, and you need two sets of dishes, one that is free of meat, yeah, and the other that where you can eat meat. Yeah. And you need two sets of dishes because, God forbid, if one molecule of meat was on the plate where you were eating something with, the mother's milk, any kind of dairy product, then that was horrible. You were mixing meat and milk. Okay. So I knew I didn't need something that kept things that tightly, but I did need some ethical, a teacher who kept good ethical conduct, and it was very clear what the ethical conduct was, and there wasn't, well, yeah, yes, we do this, but, and then a scandal happened. So you have to know kind of what you're looking for in a way, and what practice really suits you. So that's, I think, all prelude to really figuring out if you want to ordain, and where you ordain. Yeah. So at least that's my personal experience. It's also my observation. I've seen people with what I call ordination fever, and they just kind of run into some lama and ask for ordination, and some of the lamas say, yeah, sure, come back tomorrow with your robes and a bowl. And they do, and then afterwards they go, now what? And so some of them are going here and they go there and they tour around. They're chai shop gurus. They're doing this and that, just, until they eventually disrobe, or declare themselves a Rinpoche. One extreme or the other. Okay. I'm talking about the Westerners here. The Tibetans is a different situation, a little bit, wiser, smarter, I think, because they grew up Buddhist and they know what the community is like. Also, before ordaining, you have to understand what is, well, where, there's a few things here. First of all, where you're going to live and how you're going to be supported. The Tibetan community is a refugee community. When I came along, everybody was really poor. Yeah, and so there was no way they could support the Ingis, the Westerners. And, in Vinaya, it says that if you are somebody's teacher, you should support them with room and board. Yeah, because otherwise it's very difficult to keep your precepts if you have to go get a job. Yeah. So, but the Tibetans were not in that kind of situation where they could do that. And I think now, even though the Tibetan community is much better off than it was before, I think that mentality is still there. The lamas are very happy to teach us, but then, unless you have a teacher who really has a place for you to live and wants, is training a group of people like that, and unless you're aware of that and join the community, then, you go in, receive your ordination, and then you come out and say, okay, what do I do now? Yeah. And it shouldn't be like that. But there's you have different factors going on there. One is that for the Tibetan lamas, their main thing is their own institutions, to set those up in exile and renew the monastic population and so on. So that's their main thrust. Like I said, very happy and kind to teach us. Yeah. But you also have to see, what is the Lama expecting after you ordain? Yeah. Is it expected that you will then go to a Dharma center? Yeah. And do you want, if you go to a Dharma center, what is your training going to be like? Because in many Dharma centers, at least when I first ordained, you're basically unpaid labor. Yeah. And so you have to see, is that what is, what is going to happen? Yeah. Um, Not unpaid labor in like, oh, you're a bad person or something, but it was just, well, you renounce. So the Dharma centers, they all have financial problems. So, room and board, and that's it. Okay. And so, if you get sick, if you have to go to the dentist, if you have to travel somewhere, then, you're on your own. And so, from that, what you get is rich monastics and poor monastics. So, there were some where they have their family gave them money, or maybe they worked many years before they ordained, or they have some inheritance or something, and those monastics are, they're fine. If they want to go for teachings, they can go here, they can go there. Many of the when they tried to start monasteries, then you have to pay to stay at the monastery. And it's still like that, which shocks me and horrifies me that after all these years of having Western monastics, that they still have to pay at a monastery. In Asia, never, The whole idea is you renounce. You're not expected to have a lot of fortune. And if you did, you usually didn't bring it with you into the monastery. It stayed with your family. Um, yeah. So you have to see, what is expected of you. Um, and it may be different now, but when I started out, one of the expectations was to raise money for the Tibetan monasteries and to write letters to benefactors and so on to help raise money. I don't know, it may be different now, um, because things have changed and the Tibetans are better organized about that. Um, Okay, but what I'm getting at is before you ordain, figure out where you're going to live. Yeah, and I really, uh, and who's going to train you. In terms of where you're going to live, I think it's really important to live in a community, and His Holiness made that. A rule that the people he ordained, this was some years ago, that the people he ordained had to live in a monastery for at least their first 2 or maybe 3 years. I can't remember what it was. But I don't know if that's enforced or not, you know. So uh, otherwise, it's just, yeah. So you have to, if you're expected to support yourself, then you need to look at that. And, do you have enough money to support yourself? And what happens if you get sick? Would your parents help out? Do you have health insurance? when you take precepts, you take them for the duration of your life. So, what are you going to do when you get old? Yeah. The Buddha said in the teachings that if you practice well, then you won't starve, so you don't need to go to work and get a job, because the way the Buddha set the sangha up, they couldn't do business. We have precepts against buying and selling, and they couldn't be agrarians and farmers, because there's a precept against digging in the earth. Yeah. And then, of course, taking life, with raising cattle and so on. So, that it was very clear early on. Then, uh, you know, and they went pin to pot, and it was part of the Indian culture to give food. And there was also very much the idea in India that there was the whole idea of merit, yeah, and that you create merit by making offerings to people who practice sincerely, yeah. So if you were practicing sincerely, you had that confidence, yeah. And I know in my own case, I was one of the poor monastics, and and I just made the determination, I am not going to work for a job. And Buddha said that. I'm not perfect, far from it, but I'll do the best I can, and you know I'll hopefully survive. And at one point, I was in India with $50 to my name. That was it, and no return ticket to the West. And then, somehow I didn't starve. Yeah, I rationed everything, including my toilet paper, because toilet paper in India was really expensive then. Yeah, so I rationed my toilet paper. Okay, but what I'm saying is you have to have this kind of awareness of what your physical situation is going to be and what's expected of you. Okay? Um, yeah, and not just like, I want to ordain. And you go in tomorrow and, put on the clothes. And now I'm ordained and my afflictions are gone and I want to go have lunch and celebrate, and I don't have any money. Or am I supposed to handle money? Or, well, I see other people handling money. Is that something that's okay or not okay? Yeah, and I'm not supposed to eat after a certain time. Is that okay? Not okay. Yeah. So a lot of these things you learn after ordination, but a number of them you have to think about beforehand. Okay. Yeah. Then also to be aware of what some of the precepts are, and what etiquette is. There's basic Buddhist etiquette, um, how you act in different situations. And then there's the etiquette that you learn as a monastic. And that gets taught to you after you ordain. But if you're smart, you can begin to notice how other people act, what they do and what they don't do. Yeah. And who are the people that you admire, and watch how they do things. And then you can get some idea of what the etiquette is and how to act. Yeah. And then it's also important to this whole thing about ordination order and how sensitive people can be. Yeah, the idea is that when you ordain, you sit in the order in which you were ordained for each level of ordination. And it's basically so that when you come into a room, you know where to sit. Yeah. And it's also helpful because the people who ordain before you, who in general have probably been practicing longer than you, they sit in front, and so you can observe how they act. Yeah. But what we often find with the Western monastics is they get ordained, and then usually, like in His Holiness's teachings, there's sections for Westerners, and the Westerners, usually the sangha sits in front and the people sit behind. You have some kind of order. But the Western sections is usually everybody comes in together, because in Western society we believe in democracy. So you just come and sit down. But even if you manage to have monastics in front, what you have is the people who are newly ordained now that they are sangha, and they can go sit in the front, and even they try and go in the sections where the Tibetan Rinpoches and abbots and geshes are, because now they're wearing the same clothes as them. They just go and plop themselves in the front row because I'm ordained now. That doesn't go over very big. Okay. So, when you're wearing robes and when you're an inji, people will notice. Yeah. So the Tibetans are not impressed by injis who walk in and here I am, and I'm a monastic, and my family has a lot of money. So you want me as one of your best students, don't you? Okay. I've seen that happen. I mean, I exaggerate things, but I think, aren't you glad it's a little bit exaggerated? But I've seen things that are similar, and the lamas is very often, the people who come from families that have money. Well, I'll leave it at that. So what I'm getting at is you have to have a very clear motivation and know what you're going in, getting yourself into, and you're not when you ordain, it's not like, well, here I am, and you will create merit by giving me things. Yeah, $100 bills are preferable right here. Yeah. If you have that kind of attitude, how are the people in the West going to think about the Western Sangha? Okay. So the Tibetans have the idea, and there's reason for this, because in the monasteries, if you're doing debate, you need a lot of people, because then people have different ideas, there's different things to debate. So they welcome in the monasteries lots of people who want to ordain. That's one reason they do it. Then they also welcome lots of people because I just lost my train of thought. Where did it go? Yeah, yeah. They need a lot of people to debate. Oh, and because it is more merit to be ordained for one day in this degenerate age than it is to be ordained for your whole life at the time of the Buddha. So they feel that because it's so meritorious that, come one, come all, and you ordain, And then, they expect in the monasteries that as the educational um, course continues, that some people leave and some people, um, like the studies and continue with that. And some people go more towards service, in the monasteries because that's what they feel more comfortable with. Okay. Uh, but what happens is you get a lot of people ordaining who, in the Tibetan community that works because the lay people know what to expect. And the monasteries do this for a certain reason, ordain a lot of people. And they ordain them when they're young, when you're 6, 7 years old. So you can, really train them and bring them up in a certain way. What we have in the West is people are adults already, and very often they have their own ways of thinking and their own ways of acting and lots of preconceptions. Yeah. So it's a different thing. And when I first came along, they just ordained kind of anybody basically who wanted to ordain. And as a result, because people, the Westerners, didn't know how to act as a monastic. Yeah, very little was translated about the Vinaya. Many times they didn't have Vinaya teachings. They just knew the basic precepts, don't break those, but they didn't have Vinaya teachings. And then also there were a lot of people who were mentally um, ill, who ordination was not what they needed to help them. Okay, and so as a result, the Tibetan community does not respect Western monastics very much, and even in the West, in the West you have a different kind of situation where if you're Tibetan and you're a monk, you are sitting next to God. You must be a Rinpoche, and yeah, just this idolization of Tibetan monks. Yeah. The nuns are coming up now too, but they face the whole, usual view of dealing with that. Um, yeah. So here at the Abbey, I when the way we're training is we realize that we're at the forefront of setting up, establishing the sangha in the West. And so what people think of Buddhism and what they think of the sangha is going to depend on our behavior. Yeah. And so we, you know, we screen people very well. People get educated before ordaining, after ordaining, and then, of course, we do the bi-monthly posada or sojung ceremony, and we hold ourselves accountable, not in a negative way of, oh, I'm so bad, look what I did, but okay, I've got to admit I did this and make amends and so on. Yeah, so it's a different situation for if you live in a culture where Buddhism has been there for centuries and centuries. Yeah. And if you grew up in that culture, so you know some of the prayers already, you know how to act if you go to a temple. But all of this is new in the West, and so it's a different situation here. So I think it's I want to tell you all this so that you know what you're getting yourself into, and you don't kind of well, okay, I got ordained. Now what? What do I do? Uh, yeah, because there aren't a lot of monastic communities in the West. And some of them where there are, you have to pay to stay there. I know at Nalanda you have to pay. Yeah. At Chenrezig, your lunch was free, but
They provide housing and lunch and teachings, and then we paid for our materials like books and copies.
yeah, and travel and health and things, huh? Yeah. So, um, you have to see what the situation is and what's expected, because often if the center provides something, then you're expected to work a some certain number of hours for the center. We did that in France, and yeah, the nuns were assigned to cleaning the lay people's toilets. That was our offering service. Yeah. Uh, so so it's very different, and also, um, yeah, in Thailand, in the Theravada tradition, it seems that they're very welcoming to Westerners, and they seem to prepare people. Or people stay in the monasteries for a while before they ordain, so they know what they're getting themselves into. The Chinese, there's not so much for Westerners because in the West there's such a Chinese diaspora that the temples mostly direct towards their own people. But if you go there and and participate, they're very welcoming, and I've been. Yeah, you're really welcomed very much. But you got to behave properly, if you don't, you know. So, okay. So, to be aware of that kind of thing before you ordain, and also to be aware of your family relationship. Yeah. It's they ask that you have permission from your parents, and if you're married, from permission from who you were married to, and that the marriage is legally finished. No continued strings, and you're just separated, but completely finished. And that's important too. you know at the Abbey we want people to not have to not be in a relationship for a good chunk of time before they ordain, because otherwise you ordain, everything's great, then you feel a little bit lonely, somebody doesn't smile at you, and you go, oh, I remember when I was with my partner. And you daydream, and then you disrobe. Um, okay, so yeah. What else to tell you? Okay, well, there's different. We've talked about there being different Buddhist traditions, and within each tradition, different subgroups, and within each subgroup, different teachers, and so on. And so, just to be aware of that, to be aware that all the teachings come from the Buddha, so that we have an open mind and we're not sectarian, uh, but that we also don't jump around in what we're studying. Monday I'm doing, Monday I do Lam Rim, Tuesday I do Dzogchen, Wednesday I do crystals, Thursday I do, highest class Tantra, Friday I do water bowls, Saturday, I guess I should make a few prostrations, so I do that. Sunday, I do sun mandalas. Um, yeah, and so you have no consistent tradition that you're following, and your meditation is just like up in the air. Monday, I meditate on self-pity. Yeah. Tuesday, I meditate on anger. Yeah. So, yes. Okay. Yeah. So, we have to also be aware that we're representing the Sangha and representing the Dharma. And this isn't so that we get really uptight about who we are. People look at you. Yeah, but people look at you anyway. I mean, Venerable Kunchok had this big kind of purple, green, blue chartreuse mohawk. I think probably many more people looked at you back then than they look at you now. Yeah. So, um, people do look at you and they don't know what you are. But it's much better now. When I first came back, uh, it wasn't my first time back, but I was walking in LA, which is a very liberal city. People usually kind of a little hip. And people saw me and were going, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama. And it's like, no. I'm not worshiping Rama and Krishna, and I don't have a banjo that I'm beating as I stand on the street corner. But that's what people thought back then. Now it's a bit different, and you are noticed, and people come up, and so in one way, it's really wonderful in terms of meeting people. I mean, I've had people come up and say, do you know the Dalai Lama? What's he like? Are you a Buddhist? What's that like? Um, so people will open conversations. They're curious. And it's a chance to spread the Dharma. One time I was on an international flight, and one man came, and I was on an aisle seat, and he knelt on the floor, and I got true confession, you know. But when you've taken bodhisattva vows, whatever sentient beings need you to be, that's virtuous. You are that, yeah. So we did that. Yeah, one time in Europe, I was on some public transportation, and somebody said, "Do you believe in rebirth?" Huh? A total stranger. So it can be very good to as a way of meeting people. But what it also does is it makes you much more aware, because when you do stupid adagios, people notice. Yeah. And so when, if you start going to the cinema, and people are saying, oh, where are you going? Or if they see you in a pub or at a bar. Yeah. So your benefactor wants you to go out to dinner, and they take you to a place, where your seat happens to be very near the bar, and you have to say, "Excuse me, I can't be here." Yeah. So people don't always know what to do with us, and they don't know what we are. Yeah. And one time in Singapore, I was walking down the road, and somebody drove past me in a car, and he's driving going this way, looking like this. I was like, please look at the road, sir. Don't look at me. But that happens. Or somebody invited me out for lunch, Donna, and in the restaurant, she said, "Are you aware that everybody's staring at you?" I said, "Yeah." It's like, but I'm not aware anymore. It's like that's just, yeah. Then many times I've had it where people in the airport will come up to me, and it's usually women who will just put a very kind hand on my shoulder and say, "Don't worry, dear. When the chemo's over, your hair will grow back." You know? And she means well, but it's like, yeah. I was in this SeaTac airport once waiting for a flight, and one woman was walking up to me with a big smile on her face, and I'm thinking, oh, I must know her. Who is she? You know? Anyway, she's approaching. I couldn't figure out who she was, where I know her from. Anyway, she got close to me, leaned over, and said, "It's Jesus." Yeah. So she walked away after that, so I didn't have to respond. Yeah, but people are people. So you just have to, if you smile and if you're kind, it automatically breaks the ice. I've had people, on flights come up and say, "What would you like to drink, sir?" Or be in the ladies' room and another woman walks in and looks at me and goes, thinking that I'm a man. And now with this whole transgender thing, I don't know, if I'm in the bathroom, am I going to get hauled over by the airport police because they want to make sure that I'm really a woman in the woman's bathroom, or handcuff me in case I'm trying to, seduce all the old ladies in the women's bathroom. I don't know what these people think, but, that hasn't happened yet, thank goodness. Okay, but you never know what's going to happen. Yeah. So, you have to be able to handle these things and be able to just be kind no matter how somebody treats you. Yeah. And then also, what's been problematic is sometimes when you're in a situation where it happened for me is, I was flying from one place to another place. This flight was canceled, and I had another flight, and that one was late. And I was I was going to Madison, Wisconsin, and it was like the people want to pick me up at the airport. I don't want to arrive at midnight. I've been on the plane all day. And trying to rebook my flight for things that were canceled. And I was, pushy. It was like, but, I've been on this flight and this flight, and, I should get this seat first before it goes to other people. And I got on the flight and I just felt rotten, because I wasn't, I wasn't being representative of the Sangha. My afflictions had, my self-centered mind was running the show, and I just deserved that seat, because they had very few seats left. One should go for me, and so you have to, what you do, people will notice, and so it makes you more aware too, of how you act. It's unfortunate that people judge the Sangha based on one person's behavior, and even worse, if they judge Buddhism based on one person's behavior, because not all Buddhists are Buddhas. We shouldn't expect them to be. They're ordinary, most of them are ordinary beings, and we make a lot of mistakes. So we need to be careful from our side that we don't judge whole traditions or whatever on the behavior of one person. But we also need to be aware that other people might. And so we don't want to be the one who makes such a big blunder that then that person is telling the story to this person and that person and the other person, and then you yeah, then a lot of people get turned off and close their minds. We also have to be aware of why do we want to ordain. So again, it's not so you can sit in the front row. Yeah, because you start out in the back row. And what's wrong with the back row? Why do we want to sit in the front row? Well, the front row people have more status. And the back row people are babies, and I want to be in the front row. I deserve to be in the front row. I have been practicing Dharma for eons in the past. And this lifetime I have a precious human life. So my eons of practice merit sitting in the front row. Don't you agree? Thank you. Okay. So it isn't to sit in the front row. It's because we see potential in ourselves that we didn't see before. We want to actualize that potential and attain Buddhahood because we see that's the best thing to do in our life. Yeah. And living as a monastic is the best way to do that because you live within the precepts of ethical conduct. Yeah. And when you study the path, there's ethical conduct on each level of the path. Okay? When you talk about the level of the fundamental vehicle, observing karma, taking the pratimoksha precepts, monastic precepts, that's there. When you have the bodhisattva level, there's sets of bodhisattva precepts. When you do tantra practice, there's more precepts. Okay, so ethical conduct is something very, very important. So we have to want to improve our ethical conduct. Yeah. So I know for myself, one of the things that made me want to improve my ethical conduct is because I saw I had two standards. One standard for businessmen and politicians, and another standard for myself. Okay? So when businessmen and politicians lied, horrible. They're cheating people, they're deceiving people. They need to be responsible and act properly and not lie to get customers and lie to get clients. Their lying is terrible. And politicians, my goodness, like get them to say 2 words of truth. It will, so, their lying is very bad. But when I lie, it's done out of compassion. Because I don't want somebody's feelings to be hurt. That sounds good, isn't it? Yeah. My reason for lying is compassion. So their feelings are not unnecessarily hurt. Well, let me translate that for you into what it really means. It means I did something I don't want anybody else to know about because if they know, they will lose respect for me and I'll lose status. That's what it means. Yeah. So by and large, once in a while, maybe there's, some doing it out of compassion. But generally, it's a la Bill Clinton. It's like, really? That? Oh, I didn't do that. I don't do that. Yeah. And, why do people lie? very often because they've done something that they don't feel good about doing and they don't want other people to know. So, as part of our reason to ordain, we have to be very clear that we, really want to get our ethical conduct in shape and stop the excuses, the deception, the rationalization, and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so that has to be clear in our mind. And thus, when we take the precepts with so much happiness. Yeah. The precepts are not a tax that you have to pay to wear these and have this hairdo. Okay? It's the precepts are not like, well, I want to be a monastic, but I don't really want to keep the precepts. No. You ordain because you want to keep them, because you know that you aren't even living up to your own standards and you want to improve, and you've already done most of the things that the precepts say not to do, and you've realized, okay, I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt. I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to be a person who acts like that anymore. Yeah. And so with that kind of mind, then you take the precepts, and the precepts, they are such an incredible protection for your life, and such a means to really steer us in a virtuous direction, and help us become the kind of person that we want to be. But if you're seeing precepts as a burden, then the motivation for being ordained isn't spot on. Okay. Sometimes people will ordain with a really good motivation, and they start out and they go really well. And then after a while, I don't know, I just don't feel right. All these people stare at me. I feel like they're judging all of Buddhism depending on me, and I don't like that. And, what's wrong with going skateboarding anyway? Yeah, and surfing. Why can't I go surfing? I just remember the good old days when I used to lie on Huntington Beach, with my friends and sunbathe and dip in the water. And, like, I'm so unhappy living in this monastery, or living by myself. Yeah. And it's like, I live by myself. I don't have many friends, because they're lay people. I don't want to do what they're doing. Or I'm living in the monastery, and these monastics are just sometimes, they are so bossy. Can't believe it, and so hypocritical. They're on the road to do something, and they make up some excuse not to do it and ask me to do it instead. Oh, why am I living here? The precepts are the problem. If I didn't have the precepts, I could be back on Huntington Beach. Yeah, with Prince Charming. Oh, he's become Buddha boy. Um, you know, and I could do that, Yeah. So you have to be very clear about why you ordain, and make sure you keep nurturing that motivation, so that your mind doesn't go back and think, oh, but I would be so much happier. Yeah, I want to go shopping along Orchard Road in Singapore. Orchard Road. Yeah, don't you want to go to Orchard, Singaporeans? Yeah, don't you want to go Orchard Road? Go shopping. You have never seen any shopping area like Orchard Road. Yeah. you can get anything you want there. Yeah. You can get the temperature in Singapore, it's so hot. So you can get bathing suits that are this big. You can, yeah. And you can also get snow, winter jackets. They have everything. And if you go right before Christmas, in Singapore, where the weather is usually mid 80s and the 90s, hot, humid, there's Santa with his reindeer and snow on the ground along Orchard Road. Isn't there? Isn't there? Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, and then your mind just goes back to, if only, and if you ever get in that mental state, just remember the precepts are not the problem. They are not what is confining you and making you unhappy. What is the problem? What is confining you? What is the source of your misery? Is your self-centered attitude, your attachment, anger, ignorance. Yeah, so don't blame the precepts. They're there trying to help you. Yeah, it's the self-centered attitude that, throws the wrench in the machine, so to speak. So, so always maintaining our motivation. And that's why when people ordain here, I've asked each one of you who's ordained here to write out, when you first requested ordination, write out what your request was, why you want to ordain. And then also after you get ordained, the day, after, then write out, again, why you want to pursue this kind of life. And then because it happens, we are unstable sentient beings. Our minds go up and down and sideways and this and that, and we're very moody. Um, to have records, written records that we hold of when our minds were very clear and about our motivation and very enthusiastic about that, and have those written records. So if your mind starts dreaming about oh, you could go to Paris and watch the Olympics. Yeah, wouldn't that be cool? And I don't know where the Winter Olympics are. Anybody know? But no, that's for next year. Oh, yeah. Anyway, you could go wherever the Olympics are, the Winter Olympics are, the Summer Olympics. Your mind starts daydreaming about that. Just come back and reread what you had written before. And keep in touch with your basic motivation, because this is a lifelong process. Yeah. And you have to have the intention to keep the precepts for the entire life when you go to take them. If you don't intend to keep them for your entire life, then better not to do it. Okay. Then some people say, well, yeah, I intend to keep them for my whole life, but I don't know. What happens if this? I'm so afraid of making mistakes. Yeah, I want to hold the precepts perfectly, but it's really hard not to eat in the evening, and it's really hard not to go out and get KFC when I'm running errands for the Abbey and nobody else is with me, So KFC here, the fallen arches over there. That's what my aunt used to call it. McDonald's fallen arches. So, um, yeah. And it's like, oh, and it's just, I'm so afraid that I'm going to break the precepts right, left, and center. So I don't want to take them because I should be able to keep them perfectly. And I don't know if I can. I'm terrified that if I break them, hell. Hell. And I had one young monastic one time. I met him and he said, I want to be a good monk, but I just don't think I'm a very good one. And when I imagine the Buddha in front of me, he's always going, "You bad monk." Yikes, Yikes, that's really hard. I gave him a talking to, I said, the Buddha is not judging you. Yeah, the Buddha has compassion. Yeah. So you do your best, and we take precepts because we cannot keep them perfectly. If we could keep every single precept perfectly, we wouldn't need them because our afflictions would be tamed. Because all the precepts have to do with different afflictions. If we could keep the precepts perfectly, our afflictions would all be nicely subdued. Okay. So we shouldn't expect ourselves to be perfect or expect anybody else to be perfect. Yeah. But realize, okay, why did the Buddha make precepts? To make us more aware and mindful of what our behavior is, to help us to evaluate what do I practice, what do I abandon on the path if I want to go to awakening. So the Buddha made those precepts, for a reason. And he also, created the ways that you repair any infractions. Okay? There are certain precepts that if you break them with all the criteria and you conceal it, even for a minute or whatever, certain precepts, if you break, there's 4 or 8 of them, then your monastic ordination is finished. If you've done it with all the criteria, okay. But aside from those actions, with all the other categories of precepts, there's ways to make amends. Yeah. And so the idea is that if we break something, then we learn to become transparent, to reveal our mistakes. We don't hide them. Yeah. And then there's different ways to make repairs in some of, according to what the offense was. And the reparation ceremony helps you not want to have to do that again. Yeah. Uh, yeah. So you become more mindful and more careful with your actions. And then, of course, when you do, your mind is happier because, what's one of the big sources of our depression and our feeling of, not belonging and so on. I think, ethical conduct that where we haven't acted very well is a source for, some of our mental problems and so on. And so keeping precepts helps us not to, to stop doing those actions. And then we feel better about ourselves. And if you make a mistake, you own it. And nobody's standing there going, oh, 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 you bought Band-Aids at the pharmacy? You broke you broke the lapses against handling money and against doing business. Oh, bad monastic. You know, everybody else in the community is not going to say that to you, okay? Probably everybody else will go, yeah, I didn't get Band-Aids, but I got hand lotion. Yeah, I got aftershave. I got shaving cream. I got razor blades. Well, the razor blades were for the razor for cutting my hair. Okay. Okay. But, you know, if you live in a monastic community, people are not going to judge you and criticize you. It's us doing that to ourselves. Okay. So we have to, you know, it's a delicate balance to accept ourselves the way we are, as they say, warts and all, and, you know, work to improve. So a certain level of, you know, compassion for ourselves and knowing that we're not perfect, and yet a certain level of, you know, helping ourselves go in the direction we want to go in. Okay, so without pushing ourselves, but without getting denigrating ourselves. So it's a balance in there that achieving that balance is part of our Dharma practice. We would really like to have it already, but we don't. And so we often go to one extreme or the other. But as we practice more, we learn to develop that kind of balance. Yeah. It's like, yeah, I'm doing my best and I'm not keeping everything exactly to the letter, but I'm doing, you know, what I'm capable of doing. Yeah. And then in some instances you see, well, I'm not actually doing what I'm capable of doing. I'm making excuses. So let's just try and get myself step by step, slowly, to go in that direction. Okay. I've already gone over time, but if there's any questions or comments, yeah.
Venerable, what are some examples of monastic etiquette that are taught at the Abbey? Like, what has been the hardest for new monastics to learn?
I don't know what's been the hardest for you, all of you, to learn. Those of you who live at the Abbey. Okay, one person to stop swearing, okay. To just step back and let other people go first. Okay, what else?
To accept feedback with thank you rather than yes but or you don't understand.
Yeah, so accepting feedback with appreciation, or at least I will do as directed, or I will try to do as directed, or I will make excuses not to do as directed, but say I'm doing as directed. Yeah. Yeah. What else? Etiquette. Some of you, I know, but come on, you gotta say. Okay. Being asked to sit up straight.
Keep things tidy.
Oh, make your bed and keep your desk neat. Yeah, your mother didn't teach you how to make your bed? No, she made it for me. I'm a spoiled brat. Don't you understand that? Should I tell you some other things that you don't like? When, something needs to be done and you happen to be standing there and someone says, help. Yeah, we need your help. Yeah, please carry this. Please lift that. Please go tell somebody this and that. Yeah. You don't understand. You cannot ask me to do anything on the spur of the moment. I do not like swarms. I do not like people looking at me and saying, we need strong people to come and help. Because I will refuse, because that is biased. People should equally have to help, strong or not strong. Lift up that 20-pound whatever. Huh? Oh, yeah, the Ganjira, yes. Okay, yeah, what else don't you like? You are? Or you used to?
I have been.
You have been.
Before I became ordained.
Oh, okay.
Before I became ordained, I used to have a fairly loud personality. I'd had a really big laugh. People could recognize my laugh 100 meters away. And, I was fairly loud. And since I've become ordained, I've really made a point of just calming down. And, even just talking into this phone, I think if I was like I was before, I'd be talking more like this rather than like this.
Yeah.
So, it's...
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. So maybe we'll end right now? Okay. And let's, the mandala offering, I've noticed, is getting slower and slower. So we don't have to do the 100-yard dash with it, but,
A little zip.
Okay.